Okay, let's go live, please.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. This is the House Appropriations Committee. It is Wednesday, April 9th, 2025. It's just after 1:45 in the afternoon, and we have just come back from the floor, and we're pleased to have James Duffy from the Joint Fiscal Office to talk to us about an overview of state funding for information technology. And you should all have a paper copy if you normally get those things. Otherwise, they are posted on our committee page and we have it on the screen. So James, introduce yourself and take it away, please.
Good afternoon. For the record, James Duffy, Joint Fiscal Office, here to talk with the committee today about an overview of state funding for information technology in Vermont. So we are roadshowing this presentation a little bit. It was first delivered a week ago in the House Committee on Energy and Digital Infrastructure, who's doing some work looking into funding sources, both for routine IT spending as well as capital improvement or IT modernization, large-scale IT modernization projects in the state of Vermont. As we'll talk about more later in the presentation, as a hot topic around the country, there are a lot of state governments, federal agencies, territorial governments who are dealing with aging IT systems in the public sector and the challenges of both upgrading them, which are very complex projects, and funding those projects, which can be quite expensive. So the extended director's cut of this presentation does include a first set of about 8 slides on basic state budgeting practices. This is the first of them, just our standard language about JFO being a nonpartisan legislative office dedicated to producing unbiased fiscal analysis. For the purpose of this presentation today, unless Madam Chair, you prefer otherwise, we have a room full of kind of state budget aficionados here. So I thought we could skip ahead to the second part of the presentation, which goes over specifically state IT budgeting and funding practices.
I think we know about the budget.
Yeah, I think this committee does.
Okay, so take us to.
As I'm kind of just scrolling through the slides here, there are a couple of things that I will highlight. We're not going to go over these first 7 or 8 slides in detail.
Okay.
There's a couple of things to flag for the committee and keep in mind as we go through some of the later slides. On this slide, you can see this kind of org chart of the 3 branches of state government. And something that I think it's useful to keep in mind as we go through this is how much space the executive branch agencies take up on this org chart. You've got the legislative and judicial branches up there at the top. But the rest of this chart is, a lot of the organizational structure of the executive branch. And you'll see that a lot of this presentation talks about IT funding practices within the executive branch. And this is why. It's not because we're picking on the executive branch for any reason. It's that their both organizational footprint and, as a consequence, their IT footprint is a lot bigger. So for that reason, a lot of this presentation will talk about practices within executive branch IT funding. Another recurring theme throughout this is, as this committee knows, the state budget is complicated, and that complexity extends to IT funding as well. In the same way that our budget and our state government is big and complicated, full of lots of different actors, that complexity is reflected in IT spending and also IT practices across the state government. Many different agencies, departments, business units will handle some of these practices a little bit differently. So it's a topic that resists generalization, but for the purpose of this presentation today, we have some generalizations that are helpful to us. All right, moving through these extended director's cut slides here, that brings us to how IT is funded today in the state of Vermont. So I just mentioned that IT and state practices around IT spending are really complicated. You've got 3 branches of government, an executive branch full of different agencies and departments with lots of different IT footprints and needs. And accordingly, how we pay for those services really differs across business units. But there are a couple of useful generalizations that you can use when considering this topic to help make it a little more just comprehensible. So for the purpose of this presentation, we, JFO, will talk about operating costs, like those day-to-day routine expenses of providing internet connectivity in state buildings, basic cybersecurity services, that kind of thing, as one bucket of costs that we fund with one set of practices. And then we'll also talk about the category of system modernization costs. So these are one-time or kind of discrete projects that are meant to upgrade state legacy IT systems. And we consider both of those buckets of costs separately because they have different funding strategies attached. As I alluded to before, these practices will differ across the branches and the agencies and departments. Another level of complexity is that even within a branch or agency or department, a funding stack might look different based on different projects. You might have one agency doing different IT modernization work or projects, and each of which might utilize a different combination of federal funds, one-time state appropriations, or direct agency appropriations through the state budget. That kind of table being set with some of the generalizations we're going to use to talk about this topic today, I also want to start out by defining some terms. These are not official state definitions or even universally defined this way across the IT space. But for the purposes of this presentation, when you hear me say a legacy IT system, what I'm referring to is, an outdated system that might still actually work. I mean, that's an important piece of understanding why IT modernization works the way it does. A system can be a legacy system. It can be from the 80s or the 90s and still work quite well on a day-to-day basis for what it was originally designed to do. But legacy specifically implies that that system can no longer meet evolving user demands. So one thing that happens when you have legacy systems using code from the 80s that only one or two professionals know how to upgrade or work with anymore is that they're quite brittle. So as federal requirements change, right, maybe you need to report certain costs to the federal government in a certain way. That requirement could change. Your system might be so old and brittle that it can no longer really adapt to meet those evolving stakeholder demands. So when we say legacy systems, it's not that these systems are actively breaking down or no longer working, but they're no longer able to meet current and future state business needs.
So James, do we have any sense of the number of legacy systems or percentage or one of those things, or are you going to get to that?
That's a good question. And so the Agency of Digital Services does have a strategic 5-year plan for each agency and department within the executive branch. They perform kind of a centralized function and help planning IT modernization efforts for each agency and department. But as I understand it, I don't believe there's like a central catalog with all of the critical IT applications.
You hear some of them when they come in for budgets, like DOL is still on DOS or something, and some other human services ones. So we've heard bits and pieces, but.
That's right. And the Agency of Digital Services has good visibility into a lot of these systems across the agencies, but there are so many. And ADS is somewhat centralized. So, there's not perfect visibility, I would say, from any one entity into all these critical applications across state government. And then when we talk about modernization, we're really just using that as a shorthand to refer to IT projects that are replacing said legacy systems. And then I alluded to this earlier, but operating costs for the purposes of this conversation, we're talking about somewhat routine costs that are incurred, yearly, monthly, and these are our basic functionalities, like maintaining email addresses for all of state government. And we're going to talk about those separately from these big, often multi-million-dollar projects. So returning to this kind of breakdown of operating versus modernization one-time projects, we're going to talk about operating costs first, and the bottom line up front for the committee is that operating costs are generally folded into existing state budgeting practices fairly well. These are often in agency-based budgets. They're funded through funds collected by the Agency of Digital Services. There are wrinkles in the process, to be sure, but it is generally a well-established funding practice. IT modernization costs for those big system modernization projects are generally and historically have been funded as one-time appropriations to agencies and departments. And there are a limited number of vehicles through which those appropriations are made, which we'll get into later. So digging into operational costs a little bit, responsibility for routine day-to-day IT operations differs across the 3 branches. Here we have Ledge IT, which we're all familiar with. Over in the judiciary, they have the Office of the State Court Administrator, who handles routine IT service provision and planning. And then in the executive branch, it's jointly handled between the Agency of Digital Services, which plays a centralized role for a lot of different agencies and departments, And then even still today, about I think we're 8 or so years into the existence of ADS in its current form, there is a fair amount of IT operations support and funding that still occurs nested within the departments and the agencies. But as I mentioned earlier, the executive branch has the largest IT footprint out of the three. And so a lot of the practices we're about to talk about here will be executive branch specific. So in the legislative branch, our Leg IT budget is approved through the Joint Legislative Management Council and paid to the general fund. Within the executive branch, the Agency of Digital Services provides many of these foundational operating IT services, and their costs are covered via an internal service fund, which this committee may be familiar with, but I know for many members, it's a term that's new to them. But we'll talk a bit more about internal service funds and the one that's utilized by ADS a bit later on. And then in the judicial branch, IT costs are largely covered by judiciary's specific special fund, the Court Technology Fund. I will note that the judiciary has been relying increasingly on general fund appropriations to cover many of their costs in recent fiscal years due to declining fee revenues, which had previously been used to support judiciary IT expenditures. So within the executive branch, as I mentioned earlier, most IT services and spending flow through the Agency of Digital Services. ADS's budget comes in large part from an internal service fund called the Communications and Information Technology Fund. And if you ever want to dig more into internal service funds, there's a great Agency of Administration report on this topic, pictured here and hyperlinked in the presentation. It goes through all of, I believe, all of the internal service funds within state government, and certainly the largest ones. And for those who haven't looked into these in quite as much detail before, an internal service fund is basically a mechanism for cost allocating administrative expenses that aren't easily attributed to any one entity. They're generally incurred on behalf of state government as a whole. So the fact that we have internet connection and Wi-Fi in all state office buildings is a cost that's hard to attribute to A&R more than it is to the Public Service Department or the legislative staff. And so the way this is handled through the Communications and Information Technology Fund is every agency and department is basically billed on a per head basis. We take the top line cost of that service and divide it by the number of headcount within a particular business unit, and that's how that's charged. There's no kind of cost allocation that goes deeper than that. Another non-IT example for this practice would be snow removal services. We have an internal service fund that handles snow removal services across, physical state properties.
Do you have a question?
No.
Oh.
And I think where some folks get hung up on internal service funds is that they appropriations flow to them through what's known as a double appropriation. Basically, the way this process works is an appropriation for a certain purpose is made from the General Assembly or by the General Assembly to a particular business unit in state government. Let's say for the sake of an example, A&R gets their base budget through a direct appropriation from the General Assembly. Within that base appropriation, A&R will have a certain amount set aside specifically for IT spending. But most IT spending for A&R comes in the form of the services that they pay for from the Agency of Digital Services. ADS is sort of like an internal consultant or an internal contractor to state government for many agencies. And so A&R will pay ADS for their professional services by sending their money to the CIT fund, our internal service fund, right? And that internal service fund is the source from which ADS draws money to cover their own staff hours, costs, et cetera, recover the costs for their IT service provision. And that's the basic kind of flow of dollars for an internal service fund. Specifically in the CIT fund, the Communications and Information Technology Fund, ADS uses different service categories to charge different entities within state government in different ways, right? So there's a million different agencies and departments and business units who are using technology and IT services in different ways. And that all defies kind of one cost allocation mechanism. And so ADS has a couple of different ways that can bill agencies to recover their costs. Broadly, those fall into two categories: core enterprise solutions and demand. Core enterprise solutions is what I've referred to already, these generalizable foundational costs to state government that support all of our work and aren't easily, allocated beyond a headcount basis. So email addresses, internet connectivity, that kind of thing. Demand is the service category used within the CIT fund through which ADS can bill a department or agency for demand-driven services. So these are services that are really based on how many staff hours from ADS your agency is demanding, how many Microsoft licenses you're using. These are things where the cost actually goes up in an easily identifiable, measurable way based on how much that service your agency or department is demanding. And this one is important for our purposes today, this demand service category within the CIT fund, because this is one potential source of IT modernization projects, or rather it's one potential destination for appropriations that are used for IT modernization projects. If you're an agency that has like kind of a bespoke one-time big contract coming up that you're going to use to replace some foundational IT application, you might enter into some kind of agreement with ADS where they're going to provide a lot of the contractual services for that project. And that project might be billed to your agency through this demand service category. So that kind of wraps up our discussion of operating costs.
Yeah. James, this is probably not for you to answer, but obviously IT investments are something we have to keep up with, or we're going to end up with situations like we did a couple of years ago, Department of Labor legacy system. And the demands, as you alluded to, on some of the old systems cannot keep up with what we need it to function today. But I always wonder, for example, one of the latest major upgrades was the whole DMV system. And as a consumer now, I mean, in the past few months, we've had to re-register both our cars. It's all done seamlessly, either online or through the mail. And the days of going down to the DMV office are behind us, I guess, unless we had something strange going on or brand new.
Maybe a picture.
Maybe a picture, yeah. But I don't know when we do our budget reviews, if we ever see those cost savings that have to be there.
And the Agency of Digital Services has a couple of different ways that they report on those metrics. I know their annual report, I believe, has a page dedicated to their estimate of cost savings from the projects they've undertaken through various upgrades. And they also have a dashboard on their website that publishes similar information. But that is something that ADS attempts to measure and track and report on, I believe, on an annual basis, if not an ongoing one through their
Maybe I haven't paid attention to it, but it seems to me if there's cost savings, it would be reflected in that department's budget. That, we don't have the same staffing at that local DMV office because more people are doing it online now. I don't know, maybe I'm, thinking too hard about this, but IT is a tool that we need, and it's gotta show some offset somewhere, but we never see the offset.
I have two notes in response. One, just again, that ADS does collect that information. I think could speak on it better than I can. And then the second is there are cost savings of certain modernization projects, monetary cost savings. But sometimes my understanding is the measuring dollar cost savings can be quite difficult because of how fragmented IT spending is, even within departments, or at least it can take the form of things that are difficult to measure. So you might have an employee who isn't an IT professional, wouldn't appear as an IT cost, their FTE wouldn't appear as an IT cost on any papers, but maybe they spend, 40 hours a year providing IT related services for their agency. And that's something that isn't visible from a high level unless you're situated. And so sometimes the measurement of these cost savings and their workflow might benefit, right, from.
And there's a lot of moving parts. I get that.
Yeah.
It just frustrates me. We never see, or at least I don't see the apparent offsets. If anything, the costs go up. And again, maybe I'm looking at it wrong, but it's a challenge.
Nothing ever goes down.
You know,
Tiff and then Tom.
One of the things that is by funding modernization costs through one-time appropriations enables us to put off investments that we should be making, on a regular basis, because we know we're going to have to modernize systems. And the investment we made last year in AHS's DCF database, CWIS system, we could have gotten a 90% match, federal match for that, had we done it, when it needed to be done initially. But because we waited, there's only a 50% federal match. And so I'm just wondering if the way that we're budgeting for things like this, or things like radios, or, these are just the normal cost of doing business. And it strikes me that maybe we do it that way because it's a big number, and it will then blow the budget if you're targeting a 3% or 4% growth in the budget. But I don't know. I don't even know if I'm asking a question.
Well, but sort of are, Tiff, I think it's an ADS question.
Oh,
So
okay.
JFO is kind of explaining how it works.
All right.
Not why it got decided that way or the policy on how it ought to be done.
And what I can say is that, this is a problem that basically all 15 states and all the territories and federal agencies are all grappling with, is these aging systems and the high cost and complexity of replacing them. So, and states are looking into different ways of funding this work on a more routine basis. But the high cost and complexity and the finite nature of state budgets can often make it really hard if you're looking at funding school construction or meals for kids or any number of priorities, and then balancing that against information technology. That's often why I think for years you see deferred spending on these systems. And so there's some information at the bottom of this slide deck about some routinized appropriation mechanisms that are out there that other states are using. And the House Committee on Energy and Digital Infrastructure also took testimony from some professional organizations who are looking at the statewide view of who's doing what to try and innovate there.
Thank you.
And I'm following on their line as well. So one of the things that makes it hard it's to always hear, well, this department needs to be upgraded. This department needs to be upgraded. I don't have an understanding in general of, are they being upgraded in a way where they're integrated, where they're allowed to be integrated? But, the key thing here, when you say 80s and 90s, we can still make things work under these simple circumstances. And the expense of replacing them then falls into, use the word Microsoft. And, every computer has a license. Everything has an expense. Everything is, I don't, but people may have to replace their phones every 5 years because this one's shinier, or it has more storage, or it can do more things, which is a certain form of consumerism that I'm not really sure or I'm not sure how it works with the government to be able to say, if Microsoft has a handcuff on us in terms of what we're paying for, there's no competition, it's difficult to change. And so it does feel like with what Representative Harrison is saying is that we're being asked for these millions and millions of dollars. And we weren't before because it was COBOL. It was almost free because it's been there for so long. It's been so stable. And, in order to get somebody to fix it, they have to be 80. That's the reality we're shifting from. The real world is that it is now a faster obsolescence. And I guess, and this may not be for you, but it may be for ADS, but I just not, with the amount of money and the amount of time it takes to change, And we can't track it as easily as we would like to, or be able to say, really, can you do that for $2 million less? And the answer is always no. Because there's no easy way of doing it. And so that's my concern, is that IT has become a sinkhole of funds for the reasons to simply say, we have to do it. I'm like, I'm not questioning that, just questioning, is ADS the best system for this process? And I'm not sure whether or not you can even address
Probably
that.
that's not for James.
It's a really interesting.
I know, but he's from JFO. We can.
What I can say is the cost drivers behind public sector digital infrastructure projects, and why across jurisdictions and states and the federal government, they so often experience timeline and budget overruns, what we've seen here in Vermont. It's not a Vermont specific phenomenon. It's really interesting to look into some of the state policies and federal policies that drive those overruns. And so there's a piece about like, how can states better routinize and perhaps look into more routine spending for these modernization projects. And then there's a separate but related issue, which I think you were just alluding to, which is, these projects, IT, digital infrastructure projects in the public sector often are so expensive, more so than they're originally budgeted to be. And there are folks looking into how the public sector can better contract for and manage these projects to avoid those outcomes.
That I'm asking for the bigger picture, because if something's obsolete by the time it's finished, then it's just
They
another.
don't make them like they used to.
No, but I mean, this computer is almost 5 years old. It serves me well. It's relatively stable. But in another 2 years, the company that made it may not support the operating systems in it anymore.
That's how they make their money.
And now it's taxpayer money
Right.
that's constantly getting vacuumed out because, oops, sorry, I mean, we did that with the DHR stuff, with the company that
Yeah.
started the classification thing. They went out of business how many years ago? The reason we didn't have to upgrade it is because it was a book and not a computer.
So I'm going to pause this for a second because we're supposed to have, we have Annie and Tim here. If we go another 10 minutes, are you guys okay? All right, thank you. Maybe you'll
Anyway.
get, this will be interesting to you too, but it's IT.
I
Yes.
appreciate you looking.
Okay.
It's always been something.
All right. Thank you. And John?
Just more of a comment than a question here, because we're asking questions that get us into the weeds that beyond what ADS, today it's ADS stuff here, but knowing what ADS might have in play here for like the next 5 years in terms of the strategic plan would be important for us to move ahead with here, like in the next year for sure. IT costs are never going to disappear. It's always going to be like software upgrades. There's always be yearly licensing kinds of things here. And as departments are looking for ways to do things here, to collect information, analyze what they have, there's always going to be something new out there. And, to Tip's point here too, every year you delay not doing something here. And I think in the case of Department of Labor, they just never really got to upgrade things maybe as timely as wanted to because of whatever they didn't have to fund that kind of thing. So now you have to find someone who's like 75 or 80 to figure out.
We've spent millions of dollars
No,
trying to do the unemployment system.
No, I know that. Yeah, I'm aware of that. I was here 3 years ago. That came through Commerce as well. We kind of like, wow. Yeah.
And
it's
3 years
still
before
here.
that.
Because they delayed and delayed.
Then we had the joint state project that.
That's right.
There's not a lot of-
Sure did.
Yeah, and just one last comment, there's also always going to be, whatever system like you purchase, there's going to be programs. And that's just depending on that specific thing, the department agency. Yeah, for information, so. Just a reminder, gone through that in Vermont State colleges before a couple of times.
Thanks.
Okay, let's continue.
So we'll keep chugging along here with IT modernization funding. We've covered basically everything on the slide already. The only takeaway is that, these one-time appropriations are pretty much a standard practice across the state when you're looking at these large-scale modernization projects. Not aware of any business unit in the state that has, a standard recurring appropriation for this purpose. And we just talked a little bit about how the CIT funds demand service category can sometimes be one vehicle for appropriating for these projects. Direct agency appropriations are another route, right? Just through the annual budget process, A&R, for example, or PSC, whoever might have one time built into their budget. And then another third vehicle for these appropriations are special funds. And the state has a small number of special funds that are established specifically for IT modernization purposes. The largest of which, or I should say one, maybe the highest profile, would be the Technology Modernization Special Fund. This was created in fiscal year 2022 to finance investments in IT system upgrades and modernization. It's administered by the Agency of Digital Services, although appropriations to the Tech Mod Fund go to projects across state government in various different agencies. And expenditures from this fund can only be made through appropriation by the General Assembly, and specific project authorization also has to come from the General Assembly as well.
Yeah, we remember, we were in the lounge that year in 2022 and Marty had this. And that's when we created the fund. So 3 of us were there when it happened.
We had a lot of.
We had money to put in. That's right.
And so this was actually, my understanding is the Tech Mod Fund was created in fiscal year 2022 through the FY23 bit bill in the C section, or maybe it was the E section, amending the FY22 budget adjustment act. Anyway, if you're looking at the statutory history, it's a little complicated here, but long story short, it was created in fiscal year 22. And the only other piece I'll add about project authorization is JITOC, the Joint Information Technology Oversight Commission, also has a role in approving expenditures for projects authorized through the Tech Mod Fund. So as it stands now, all projects that are authorized under the Tech Mod Fund, all their expenditures have to be approved by JITOC before they are dispersed. And so this has supported some of our biggest, highest profile modernization efforts. We've talked about, I think, each of these already at various length: the Unemployment Insurance Modernization Project, the DMV modernization, the ERP financial system upgrade. But these have all been one-time. There's been no recurring annual appropriation made to this special fund. And I'll just add that there have been 3 transfers to the Tech Mod Fund from the general fund in the time that's existed. These totals to about $77 million. And of that $77 million of transfers, just over $50 million has been appropriated for specific projects. I'm happy to provide any additional detail on those projects, but there are about 5 or 6 projects that have been authorized under the Tech Mod Fund thus far. And that's kind of the biggest vehicle for these projects in state government. There are others, right? We talked about the CIT demand service category. There are other special funds at a smaller scale. The Court Modernization Fund, or the Court Technology Fund, rather, funds this kind of work in the court system and the judiciary. Within the executive branch, the tax department has their own special fund called the Tax Computer Mod Special Fund. This is the only example that I'm aware of a special fund for IT upgrades within state government that has a recurring revenue source. In the past, and I believe this is still current practice, they have, the tax department has collected a very small percentage of fees. I think 0.00007 cents of every dollar that's collected by the tax department through various compliance functions and enforcement functions goes towards the Tax Computer Modernization Special Fund, although they can speak to that in more detail. But a very small part of tax department revenue is dedicated to this dedicated special fund every year to fund some of their IT systems. But most departments don't have, budgets of that size or revenue streams of that flexibility to self-sustain the IT upgrades that they often need. And I'll just add that the threshold for legislative engagement on these projects really varies. Some of them are huge and have a lot of attention in the legislature, and some of them might be a bit on a smaller scale and get relatively less legislative attention.
So let's just skip over to practices vary in other states.
Right,
Yeah, there you go.
So in other states, they have experimented with various different approaches to fund this work. A mix of recurring and one-times. I will say nobody's developed a special bullet for finding money in the budget every year for this kind of work. Revolving funds internal to government have been one approach that's been experimented with. So maybe a one-time appropriation that's then used as revolving funds for loans to agencies and departments to fund these upgrades. I believe Kentucky has a competitive funding system where state agencies and departments submit applications to compete for a limited pot of IT modernization projects. So that's been one kind of innovative solution that's been set up. But practices really do vary both for how IT routine expenses are funded across the country, as well as how these one-time projects are funded. But I think the takeaway that I would just leave the committee with is that, there's no one perfect approach that's been identified by other states. It's a challenge. This work is expensive. It is often necessary, but it does compete with other budget priorities. And, I've spoken Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee in a little bit more detail about some approaches that folks are experimenting with in other states. But I know we're running up against time here, so I'm happy to provide that information to the committee as a follow-up, if you'd like, Madam Chair. And then this is just the conclusion I'll leave you with about that kind of the bottom line up front, IT operating costs and mod costs.
Expensive and complicated. And ever changing. So are there any, I guess the federal funds piece of this would be dependent on the project. Some things the feds are requiring people to do, and so they're willing to kick in some money to do that, but there isn't any little pot for general modernization.
There was a grant program at the federal level the last several fiscal years that was funding specifically IT modernization in the states. I don't believe that's set to receive more appropriations this year, but yeah, there are funds. And that's one advantage of the internal service funds. That cost allocation allows us to very specifically identify what costs are going to what project, which enables us to take advantage of federal match opportunities when there is federal money available.
Okay. Thank you very much for trying to clarify and help make some of it, because yeah, if we could find a solution, that would be terrific. All right, appreciate it. So we have Annie Noonan and Tim Dumont from the state's attorney and sheriff's office to come talk about federal funding. And Erin, we have stuff on our website. Is that okay? So if you go to our committee page, you will see little spreadsheet. And welcome, and we appreciate your quick response. And I think maybe you have fewer lines than some other agencies and departments have, so that makes it a little bit easier. But it's great to have you in and get an understanding of how you are or could be affected by the world as it seems to be right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Tim Dumont, Department of State's Attorneys and Sheriffs Executive Director, and Annie, who will walk you through hopefully a very short testimony about the impact on Fed funding for us.
Great. Good afternoon. For the record, Annie Noonan, State's Attorneys and Sheriffs. You're correct, Madam Chair, that we don't have a lot of federal money that comes in. I think you'll see on the sheet that we have $673,000 that comes into us. We have that funds 4 positions, 2 separate programs. One is the program funding that we receive from what used to be called the Governor's Highway Safety Program. It's from the Federal National Highway Safety and Traffic Administration, NHTSA. It's now called not the Governor's Highway Safety Program, it's now called the State Highway Safety Office. They fund 2 prosecutors who are dedicated to prosecuting cases of impaired driving, whether that's drug or alcohol impaired driving, reckless driving, distracted driving, that result in serious bodily injury or death resulting. So they're sort of high impact, high victim cases. And they prosecute those cases statewide. They assist our 14 regional offices. They're very expert in the whole issue of drug recognition. They recommend and work, and they train they train law enforcement officers down at the academy in the whole issue of DRE, drug recognition experts. They recommend people for the program. And so that money has been coming to us for many, many years. An interesting note is we're one of the very few small states that receives money for more than one prosecutor. Our statistics and our numbers have been very good over the years. It's an education and prosecution grant, but because Vermont did so well over the years, the National Highway Safety Administration said Vermont deserves 2 positions if you'd like one. So they agreed to fund
One.
if you'd like one.
That doesn't happen very often.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
One thing I wanted to add on data, because I know your committee likes what the impact is. About 60 people die on the roads every single year in Vermont. And so it's not an insignificant per capita impact in terms of, so there is some justification for the 2. And then the second piece is we have the highest number, not per capita, but on a volume basis of drug net recognition expert interactions, meaning officers called to a car, doing a DRE examination, which they're trained to do as experts and then testify at trial, or doing a post-incident review afterwards if you can't get a DRE, more than California. Vermont has more DRE interactions than the state of California.
Not per capita, just
Not
the
per capita.
total number,
Total volume.
absolute dollars. That seems,
Yeah, that's hard.
that makes me worry about California, actually.
Don't drive in California, guys.
It does show that we have a very impacted population in the drugs marketplace it's one of the indicators.
So are these these are prosecutors, so they're not DREs themselves?
They train the DREs.
They train,
Help
how
train
many
the DREs.
DREs do we have?
We can get that for you. Ideally, every county has availability. For example, Lamoille only has 1, I think, at the moment, and it can be from the state police, it can be from a municipal agency, but we can get you that number, the total number of officers.
Curious to
You have
know.
to have a couple years of experience. You can't be straight out of the academy to do the work.
Otter was one, wasn't he?
Was it Otter a DRE?
He was training at the.
So our prosecutors,
Need that.
and our prosecutors also have gone through lots of the training about all of this so that they're able, we have one of our newer prosecutors, Matt Dolezal, who came into this position. He was a prosecutor up in Franklin County at the Franklin County State's Attorney's Office. And when an opening here came in, he took that. So he's actually just recently spent a week at the academy. He spent a couple of days. I think he might've been in Rhode Island, but there was some stuff that he needed to hear and see to get him more of an expert in this. But we've been very lucky with the program. I think the big question in everybody's minds is, you think that federal money's going away. Our conversation with the state folks is that they don't think it will go away, that seems to be a program that is not in disfavor with anyone at the federal level. So we think that the money should be coming to us again.
And I see it's a 25 or 75-25 mess. So the 355 is the federal amount.
Yes, we have 25% match.
Okay, let's say in the worst case scenario, I'm glad to know it's a low risk.
Yeah.
If the federal money went away, what would you do?
If the federal money went away, we would try to absorb the 2 prosecutors in any vacancy positions that we have. Dennis Wigman lives in South Burlington. So there might be options. Yeah, there might be options. Yeah, I'm a state's attorney.
Yeah.
So Dennis, would have some options probably for some of the counties running up on the Route 7 corridor. Matt lives here in Montpelier. We would always try to keep our experienced prosecutors in one of our other offices. There is, the good news is, knock on wood, we don't have a lot of vacancies right now in our prosecutorial positions, but we always try to make sure that if anybody were to be in this situation, we would absorb them.
Could they still do this work?
They would be able to do the work, but I don't necessarily know that the SA would dedicate them to this kind of,
So it might be
Solely
a
that.
reduced scale.
right.
Might do other types of work too.
Yeah, as you know, in grant funded positions, when they're focused, you have to focus on what they're paying you to do. So they're handling just basically driving
Yeah.
issues.
Right, Wayne, is your question?
So how's caseload? Has it been steady increasing, decreasing?
Yeah, so the statewide, the line prosecutors who are in each office cover the DUI 1s, the first interactions, and most of the DUI 2s. These folks get involved when there's someone that dies or serious bodily injury, because those can just overwhelm an office at times. So, for example, hypothetically, there's a serious case in one of your larger counties right now that's being staffed. An individual was killed on a major roadway in the largest county in Vermont. That's being staffed by our central office and these two prosecutors because of the potential for a conflict of interest in the local office involving the officer and dedicated resources and time. So it's a caseload off pressure, right? It helps reduce some of the balloon with these two dedicated folks. But it is competitive, right? If there was lots and lots of these incidents, their ability to be in 14 different courthouses is the major challenge of being a statewide person.
They don't count caseload for this the same way you do for the regular.
It's a little bit, yeah, it's a little different. Yep.
Okay. That makes sense.
They also second chair.
Yeah.
Sometimes on a case that they think has some precedential value that maybe doesn't rise to like a homicide level. These are when somebody is impaired driving and kills you, that's a homicide. And so they second chair on some of the
Yes.
lower level cases, not first chair, but they might second chair on a lower level type offense so that the local folks in our office, the other prosecutors are having the benefit of them kind of whispering in their ear, talking in their ear during the trial and all of that so that they start to learn more about how to properly prosecute impaired driving cases, but they focus, as Tim said, the Shelburne case, the Shelburne Road case that's being prosecuted now, which is a really thorny case, as you can imagine. They're taking the lead on that, and they've taken the lead on some of the others.
And alleviating the conflict of interest with the
Yeah.
local office that works with
Yeah.
that agency.
Of course.
The other thing is they do handle appeals that come out of the DUI practice. So DSA Dolezal is working on an appeal. Dennis Wigmans handles a couple, 2 to 3 a year, which can be pretty exhaustive. So they do that whole thing, trial to appeal. They do a lot of work in the whole system for driving work. Yeah.
That's your first grant.
They also, I just want to mention too, to kind of do as a shout out to the program, folks from the State Highway Safety Office, they also bring in some really fabulous national trainers for our June training, which is, as you know, the Judicial College Week happens in
Yes.
June. The courts close down, so the courts train their people and the Defender General trains his people and we train our people. They will pay for and they fly some people in like who are really, outstanding experts in the field. And that's another thing that they do on the grant so that we don't have to pay for that and they cover all those costs. So it really benefits our department greatly to have this relationship with the State Highway Safety. The second federal grant that we have is $337,000 it comes to us as a subrecipient from the Vermont Center for Crime Victim Services, CCVS, out of Waterbury. They received the money from the U.S. Department of Justice, the Office of Violence Against Women, and these two prosecutors have a focus area on domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking, and dating violence. That's the 5 areas of prosecution that they focus on. And they are assigned they're embedded in a county. So Chittenden County has one of we call them the DV prosecutors for short, the DV prosecutors. And Orleans County has one. And then this year, again, a shout out to CCVS, there was some deobligated money from another subrecipient, and they gave Bennington County $40,000 resource for a period of time, just basically for the fiscal year, to hire a DV sex assault investigator. He was a retired former state police officer from the area, and he is basically interviewing witnesses and helping with depositions and stuff for people people who are charged with any of those types of crimes. And of course, a lot of what we handle in our offices are domestic violence, serious sexual assaults. The reviews from our Bennington State's Attorney, Erica Marthage, about how much work he's been able to do has just been tremendous. He goes and interviews witnesses, talks to them about, witnesses and victims. I mean, those are all victim-related cases, and he's sort of a real liaison to the victims. Now,
what happens when the money runs out?
well, so when the money runs out, the position runs out. Unless I think that they've been so impressed. I want to say CCVS. I think they've been very impressed with the work. I know I think they had a conversation with SA Marthage recently. Again, you never know if there's going to be any de-obligated money, and it's particularly right now for them, I don't know what they're going to have. I mean, I think everybody is aware of the fact that they're very concerned about their funding. So that makes me concerned, will there be enough, the money available for the prosecutors? Now, in recent conversations I've had with the staff from CCVS, they say, we think we're going to be okay. And we hope that the money's still going to come. I don't have, I think we've shared the conversation, myself and the CCVS staff, in the realm of, would this potentially be an area where we could see being targeted? It's under under an office called the Office of Violence Against Women. You would hope that nobody would think that that's, not worthy of funding, but it does. This gives me more concern. I don't know if Jen Pullman, I know she's been in talking to you about stuff. I'm sure, I think everybody's being very cautious and careful as to what they say, in case anybody's listening. But I think we're all worried about, does somebody think that that's not worthy to be funded? I don't know. We're hoping we get the money. Again, if we don't, we would try to absorb those two positions back into our offices again. They're in our office. We would just have to, make sure we try to figure out where to fund them.
This looks like the end date is this June.
Yeah, most of these grants, even though.
When you're renewable.
Well, right, even though this grant is generally, we usually can get authority for 3 years. It's still annually renewed. Like Barb and I have to put our paperwork in, put our budgets in, and they have to say, yes, we still have money for you each year. When we hire people, we'll normally say to them, this is the start, or this is year 2 of a 3-year grant, but it is reauthorized annually. So we have to make sure we tell people that it's a reauthorized grant.
So is this, is this the end of year 3, or is this one?
This one, I believe, is in year 2.
Starting in July 1st of 2025 will be year 2?
Yes.
Trim.
Just a quick clarifying question, really. You had 2 prosecutors, and then under the FTE column, you have 3.
Oh, okay, good catch. And yes, so prior to recently, there were 3 prosecutors, but CCVS and our department agreed that the funding they were able to give us wasn't paying for 3 people. And what was happening was this: we had ARPA money. The legislature back in FY 22 gave us $3.3 million for staffing assistance in the clear the backlog. So what we were able to do is, with the CCVS grant, there were 3 people. They said, we talked about it. Go ahead and hire 3. They only paid a portion of the salary. I think they were paying in some cases 28 hours or 30 hours on each of these 3 people. And we were using the ARPA money to fund the rest of it. Once ARPA money went away, which it did, we then, CCVS, and we spoke and said, look, that the money doesn't pay for 3 people. They said, we agree. So that's what the 3 was in there for in terms of what's listed, but there's really only pays for 2. But that's exactly right. And similarly, like, we didn't take a lot of ARPA money or receive a lot, but that was clear the backlog money. It was very effective. It was used exclusively for staffing in the field, which we were really proud of, to say that it was an exclusive to the field, helping get them help that they needed. So that was really helpful. And the other piece of money that we received under ARPA, which we still have, is the $1.7 million federal money, ARPA money, that is been applied to our transition of the criminal case management system. I was fascinated listening to ADS. I have 9 million thoughts on that, but that's not why I'm here today. But the interesting thing with that was, so we got the $1.7 million, and why did we have to go, like, to answer Representative Harrison's question, like, do you just change things? Like, what makes you change? The company that we had been working with, and for years, we had a criminal case management system called Justware. That's what we're still running. They were owned by a company that sold and sold and sold. And eventually the company that finally had it the last time said, we're no longer supporting that software. You can have our new software for the rock bottom price of $3 million. And we were like, it doesn't work that way in state government. We can't just sign on to your new product for $3 million. There's a thing called, procurement rules and bidding rules. And so we're unsupported in that system. And we're using, but we went through the whole process and we're working towards getting set up with Matrix. They've done a great job. Highly, if you ever hear their them, they've been fabulous. I've never seen a contractor in state government, them and Barry Dunn, two of the best contractors I've ever seen. We are on target. They do what they say they're going to do. They're on time. It's remarkable to me, like the way things go in state government, that this has been good. But that was
9 hours yesterday in our office.
Yeah, they're just fabulous.
People from the 14 offices just working on kinks before it gets released.
And we're going to be on target and on time and no extra money and on time. We might be like a miracle, right? Modern day miracles. My mother would have seen.
I think Wayne had a question too. No, you didn't. Okay.
So that was the other ARPA money we received. So just sort of how have we spent it? That's how we've spent it.
And so, are you going to be able to spend your ARPA money in time? You're not
Yes.
worried about that getting clogged
Yes.
up or anything?
No.
You're in touch with Doug Farnham, so.
Yes. Yeah.
I worry about that too. Okay. So what else on the spreadsheet is there anything else you want to?
I think that's it for us. We're just the 4 positions. We'll keep our fingers crossed on all of it.
Okay, any other questions from anybody? It's nice that you don't have too many to worry about and you can keep track of them. We've seen lists from other agencies.
I know.
We haven't got, but yeah. Yeah, but it's important, all of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Truly is.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We really appreciate you responding so quickly. It's
Well-
helpful to us.
You're flagged in our email inbox, Madam Chair.
How when you're the appropriations committee, right? All right, thank you. Thank you very much. So committee, I'm getting texts from Erin and trying to figure out, I know, but she sent me texts. We are trying to figure out when schedule, who are we trying to schedule? Judiciary? AG's office? So, this is all we have for today. Let me go through this first. Judiciary is at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, so we'll start again at 9. We have a break, and then at 11:30, we're going to take up a bill. Remember, we have bills sometimes. So S27, the medical debt bill, came out of healthcare on a unanimous vote, 11-0. Feel free to talk to your friends, Woody, in healthcare.
Can we request Woody to come in?
You're welcome to request Woody. I'm wondering, Lynn, whether this one might be yours, the medical debt. We'll be on for next week. Will you're on mute. Lynn, you're on mute.
I keep
Okay,
forgetting. Yes, it is the treasurer's office
right.
and
So it would be up next week.
yes,
Not this-
I hope my husband's getting more self-sufficient. He's not there yet.
Okay,
Post-op is on Tuesday. So I think the soonest I can come in will be Wednesday. I'm probably gonna be coming in next week, most of the days. if not-
okay. And I think Tuesday maybe when this is up, so we'll either postpone it or have somebody else here,
Yeah.
depending upon how it all goes. Will
Yeah.
you want to be here tomorrow to vote for it?
I'm not gonna vote on this one.
Okay, so that won't be
I
one of your
would like
days.
to hear what they have to say. I actually got a phone call from a hospital executive to try to lobby me.
Okay, so we won't use tomorrow as one of your days, so you can participate but not vote.
Yes.
Okay, that sounds fine. So that's gonna be at 11:30 tomorrow. My understanding is if we get it out, it'll be on notice for Friday and it would be up Tuesday and Wednesday. So we'll find a substitute for you. We'll figure that out for Tuesday.
yeah.
I don't think it's that complicated, so
Yeah.
we can make
Well,
that.
It's a little more complicated than I was originally concerned about, but that may not be a bad thing.
Okay,
There's some kind of an organization that is going to handle this.
That's right. Undue Medical Debt is a nonprofit organization, but we'll hear about that tomorrow.
Yeah, I'd
Um,
like to hear what they have to say about it.
Yeah, okay. And then tomorrow, this is what we were talking about, trying to schedule the AG. And so tomorrow, we think the education bill will be up on the floor. It's possible it will not be up on the floor tomorrow, but it's scheduled to be up on the floor tomorrow. So, Aaron, I don't have an answer for you, because if we're not on the floor, if we're on the floor, then probably not tomorrow. Maybe we could just get them in for Friday. Um, yes, Friday, we're on the floor at 9:30. We have federal funding at 11. So maybe Friday, first thing after lunch. I'm trying to keep us too long on Friday if we don't have to, but at least if we could maybe do it right after lunch then. See if that works. All right. And tomorrow, I just don't know yet. I'll know more later, but I don't know today. So I think that's it for now. We'll be